Last session, we said that Wordsworth's diction is common and simple in that it consists mainly of short words, monosyllabic and bisyllabic words, and native words, words that were part of Old English, the earliest stage of the English language. In this session, I want to observe some further ways in which Wordsworth's vocabulary, his diction, the words that he uses, I want to observe further ways in which his vocabulary is simple and common, but I also want to observe how some basic terms from English grammar can help us describe that vocabulary. We can see another way in which Wordsworth's diction is simple and common and unelaborated, as indeed he says it is, if we remember that we can refer to the world and label things in many different ways. And I want to make this point by observing that a botanist would refer to the flowers that Wordsworth saw in a way that is different from how Wordsworth refers to them. If you asked a botanist, for example, to name the flower Wordsworth saw beside the lake, those daffodils, he or she might say, yes, the Narcissus pseudo-narcissus. That's what that flower is. And a botanist might say that because that is the special term that botanists devised in order to refer to and name this flower and describe this flower. For botanists, this is a precise and informative way. It would be a precise and informative way of referring to this flower, since it names, right, that expression, Narcissus pseudo-narcissus, names the genus and the species of the flower. And it might be worth noting that this way of naming plants and classifying plants was devised right around Wordsworth's time, slightly before Wordsworth's time, by a famous Swedish botanist, Carl Linnaeus. And really his, this way of using Latin terms to identify the genus and species of plants was celebrated near the end of the 18th century, and it had a certain kind of cachet. Wordsworth probably knew about it. Nevertheless, he does not avail himself of this way of referring to the flowers that he saw. And I think it's fairly obvious to why he wouldn't use that, that more formal term. For Narcissus pseudo-narcissus is, first of all, it's Latin. It's not just an English term derived from Latin, it's Latin. And it is a technical scientific term that really is incomprehensible to those who are not botanists. And so it wouldn't really be very good to do what Wordsworth is trying to do in this poem, which is to describe, to provide graphic images, to express feelings, and also to be understood. He wants his poetry to be understood by a wide range of people, not just specialists, not just botanists. Also, even though Wordsworth was not a botanist, and even though he's not addressing botanists, he still might have referred to the yellow flowers as just narcissus, as was sometimes done in England from the 17th century onwards. He might, for example, have written the first stanza in this way: I wandered lonely as a cloud that floats on high over vales and hills, when all at once I saw amongst the crowd Narcissus with his golden frills. Now, just Narcissus, that term was used on some occasions in common talk in England from the 16th century on. And it was a possibility for Wordsworth. He might have used that word narcissus to refer to the flowers, and many English-speaking people in his country would have understood what he was talking about. But had he done that, had he referred to the flowers as narcissus, he would have brought in associations with ancient Greek and Roman stories about that young, beautiful man, Narcissus, who spurns the love of Echo and who falls in love with his own image and pines away as he looks in a pool, falls in love with his own image and pines away or commits suicide and becomes a flower. Now, Wordsworth doesn't use the word Narcissus to refer to the flowers, I think, because he doesn't want to bring in allusions to ancient Greek and Roman stories and mythology. And one of the reasons I think he doesn't want to allude to these things, to ancient Greek and Roman myth, is that he agrees with Samuel Johnson on this matter. Now, Samuel Johnson was a great 18th century critic, and he is infamous for taking issue with Milton's pastoral elegy, Lycidas, which was published in 1637. Milton writes this pastoral elegy in which he presumes to lament the drowning of one of his friends. And Johnson thinks the elegy fails in part because it really does not come across as expressing real passion or grief. And one of the reasons it fails to do the job of elegy, which is to express grief, is that there's too much allusion to this ancient Greek and Roman storytelling and poetry. So here's Johnson writing about Milton's Lycidas. Lycidas, is not to be considered as the effusion of real passion, for passion runs not after remote allusions and obscure opinions. Where there is leisure for fiction, right, for stories, ancient Greek and Roman stories about figures like Narcissus, where there is leisure for fiction, there is little grief. That's from Johnson's Life of Milton. So I think Wordsworth basically agrees with Johnson on this point. He feels that that sort of specialist, learned allusion to ancient Greek and Roman names and pastoral poetry really is not fit for expressing real passion. And that is one reason I think Wordsworth avoids referring to the flowers by way of the term Narcissus. Wordsworth also avoids another possible way of naming the flowers he sees, which was also around in English-speaking society of his day. He might have called it the Lent lily, and thereby associated it with the Christian calendar, in particular the period between Ash Wednesday and Easter, which is referred to as Lent, that period between Ash Wednesday and Easter, marking for Christians the resurrection of Jesus. This is what another 19th century poet, A.E. Housman, does in a poem sometimes entitled The Lent Lily. "'Tis spring, come out to ramble the hilly brakes around, for under thorn and bramble about the hollow ground the primroses are found. And there's the windflower chilly with all the winds at play, and there's the Lenten lily that has not long to stay and dies on Easter Day." A.E. Housman. Now, Wordsworth avoids this term as well. He uses neither Narcissus nor Lent lily to name or refer to the flowers he sees. He goes with daffodil with a lowercase d. True, daffodil, the word daffodil, is still an English word. It's an English word, but it is one that still derives from ancient Greek and Latin. But by Wordsworth's time, it was also a common name for that flower, one that pretty much every Anglophone in his country would have understood. So Wordsworth's diction in the poem is simple and common in that it consists mainly of short words, monosyllabic and bisyllabic words. It consists mainly of native, old, common, Old English words passed down from the earliest stages of the language, though there are also several words that derive from Old French and Latin, some of the bisyllabic and trisyllabic ones. Wordsworth's diction is also common in that it avoids or excludes other kinds of diction. It avoids or excludes scientific specialist botanical terms. It avoids religious Christian terms for name at least Christian names of the flower, ways of referring to the flower which would evoke a Christian worldview. And it avoids explicit Greco-Roman terms for its main subject. Now, the effect of this diction, of this kind of diction in the poem, I think, is that first, the utterance is relatively simple and therefore easy to understand and comprehend. The utterance, I think, as a result of this diction, or this diction is one of the things that accounts for our sense that the utterance seems sincere, emotional, informed by feeling, and it is also, this diction also accounts for the poem functioning as an occasion, being an occasion for readers to reflect, to understand, and to feel. Now, I want to conclude our discussion of Wordsworth's diction just by recalling another major source of a wide range of terms that I think are very useful for describing the words of poetry, and that is grammar. Grammar has such a bad name these days, and I think many of our schools have abandoned teaching it in any rigorous manner, which I think is unfortunate for several reasons. I think knowing grammar and the vocabulary that grammarians have for describing our language helps us write and speak good English. But it also provides us with a very powerful vocabulary, which we can use to describe the language of poetry. Let me give you a few examples. Two terms that grammarians use to discriminate between kinds of noun are proper noun and common noun. Proper noun, the expression proper noun is used to refer to a term that is used to refer to a thing or a place. A proper noun is a term that usually begins with a capital or uppercase letter, and which is used to refer to a particular individual or place, possibly a thing. So an example of a proper noun would be the word Wordsworth with a capital W. Now, a common noun is usually a noun that begins with a lowercase letter and is used to refer to a kind of thing. So dog or lake would be examples of a common noun. Now, notice that there are no proper nouns in Wordsworth's poem. Yes, we have daffodil, but it is in the lowercase and it is not used to refer to a particular flower, but to many flowers of a particular kind. So I don't really think that daffodil would qualify as a proper noun on strict definition of a proper noun. So even if we did want to say that daffodil was a proper noun, even though it's not being used to refer to a particular flower and it does not have a capital D, still, that would be the only one. Now, Wordsworth might well have referred to the lake he saw with the proper noun, Ullswater, since this is probably the lake he saw and the one he's describing in this poem. Also, he might have referred to where he was when he's beside the lake with the proper names Watermillock and Gowborough Park, since this is probably where he was when he saw those flowers. We know this because his sister Dorothy kept a journal in which she recounts the experience of walking with William in April 1802 in the Lake District of Northwest England and seeing daffodils by a lake. And she refers to where they were by their proper names, Watermillock and Gowborough Park, which are proper nouns used to refer to specific places on the shores of Ullswater or near Ullswater, which is the proper name of the lake. Wordsworth may well have drawn on Dorothy's entry to compose the poem later, but notice that he does not include any of the proper nouns that Dorothy includes in her accounts of the experience, Watermilk and Galborough Park. Neither does he use the proper noun Ullswater to refer to the lake. So his poem is not a travelogue. Wordsworth is not saying, oh, you must go to Ullswater in spring to see the flowers. You know? The particular location is not pinned down by proper nouns that identify places. Wordsworth sometimes does do that in some of his other poems, such as Tintern Abbey, but this one he doesn't use a proper noun to identify a place. So it's just another way in which the diction is simple. It's simple in the sense that it excludes proper nouns. The simplicity, I think, again, makes it easy to understand. We don't have to go and consult a map or a note to know what particular place Wordsworth is mentioning. And I'm not sure if perhaps it makes it seem, right, this absence of proper nouns, which would pin down a particular place. It makes it seem as though it's not the particular place that is important, but just the personal experience of perceiving and remembering that really is important. Grammarians also refer to some parts of speech with the term pronoun. And they use that word pronoun to refer to words that take the place of a noun, that stand in for a noun. Now, notice that I think this term is useful for describing an important aspect of Wordsworth's diction in this poem. Notice that we do get some third-person pronouns. They, their, them, they. But notice how common first-person pronouns are and first-person singular pronouns. I, the word I, first-person singular pronoun occurs 5 times. Me, 1 time, and my, 2 times. Notice there are no first-person plural pronouns. There's no we, us, or our. And Wordsworth might have used those first-person plural pronouns, since after all, he was with his sister Dorothy when he had this experience he's describing in this poem. But no, there's a noticeable frequency with which first-person singular pronouns occur in the poem. It's I, me, and my. And I think that's a valuable observation to make about the poem. It's a description of the diction. It goes to the description of the diction in the poem. And I do think it's one of the things that gives us the sense that this poem is personal. Right? The utterance comes across to me as being very personal, intimate and personal, in part because of the occurrence, the frequency with which first-person singular pronouns occur, and the absence of first-person plural pronouns. Now, one final example of how the vocabulary that grammarians use, that grammar provides us, can be useful when we're trying to describe the language of poetry. Grammarians speak of verbs and verb tenses when they are speaking about the terms that we use to refer to actions and the time at which actions are being performed. Now notice that the poem is, in an important sense, a narration of events that occurred in the past. And Wordsworth indicates that these events occurred in the past by using the past tense of verbs to describe it. Again, I know the terminology from grammar can be a little frustrating since different grammarians have different terms, but we could say that there are many instances of the simple past. Some grammarians would use the term imperfect. Let's just go with the simple past. Many verbs are in the simple past tense. So, for example, I wandered, I saw, I gazed, I could not, I little thought. The flowers stretched, the waves danced. The flowers outdid the show, had brought. That last one there is a past perfect tense. Had, it's not the show brought, it's the show had brought, past perfect. So we do get some verbs in the simple past tense. But even though the event being described, the experience being described, occurred in the past, Wordsworth also uses many verbs in the simple present tense to describe it. So the cloud floats, the stars shine and twinkle, I lie. The inward eye is the bliss of solitude. The flowers flash. My heart with pleasure fills and dances. Right? So it's funny. Even though he's describing something that occurred in the past, Wordsworth uses many verbs in the present tense to describe it. And he also uses many present participles, or you have the root of the verb with an ing ending on it. So, for example, the flowers are described as fluttering, dancing, tossing their heads. The line of flowers is described as never ending, and the waves are described as sparkling. I'll just leave it at that. We could get even more precise by saying that there are some participial adjectives, like sparkling, and an implied past progressive verb tense. It's funny, Wordsworth does not go, the flowers were fluttering, the waves were sparkling, the flowers were tossing their heads. He excludes that auxiliary verb, were, and just describes the flowers as fluttering, the waves sparkling, the flowers tossing. Anyway, the basic point I want to make is just that he uses the present tense and present participles to describe an event that occurs in the past. We mentioned earlier that among the achievements of the poem is the power to make us imagine or see in our mind's eye the scene that Wordsworth is describing. And we notice that some other readers, 19th century readers of Wordsworth, thought that this really was one of Wordsworth's gifts, his ability to give us images or pictures of things, of scenes that he was describing. How does he do this? Well, I think the observation we just made about his diction helps us understand how the poem achieves this, why the poem can do this. One of the things that makes the description vivid, Wordsworth's description vivid and graphic, that enables the reader to see or imagine the scene that Wordsworth describes, is that he uses the present tense and present participles to describe that scene and that experience that he had in the past. The present tense and the present participles, I think, make it seem as though the flowers are continuing to dance in the breeze. Though it was a specific moment in time, the action of the flowers is ongoing and indeed continues up right up to the present moment from which Wordsworth is writing. So, proper noun, common noun, pronoun, first person singular pronoun, present tense, past tense, present participle. I know some of these terms make horrify people. And I think many of us just want to dismiss them and find them boring and useless. But I don't think so. I think some of these terms from grammar can help us understand our own language, help us write and speak good English, but they can be very useful in relation to the project of describing the words that we find in English poetry, and also for when we're trying to account for the effect that a poem can have upon us. I think that they help us to be more articulate when it comes to describing Wordsworth's simple common diction in I Wandered Lonely as a Cloud, and explaining how it affects some readers. At least I hope to have provided an example in this session of how we can use some of those terms from grammar in order to describe Wordsworth's diction and to account for some of the achievements of the poem. Now, we observed earlier that one of the things Anglophones mean when they are using the word poetry to refer to a kind of literature is a text that displays unusual linguistic usage. In the next few sessions, we will try to understand this unusual usage and how it works upon us.